everyone. So this is Project GT completed. I posted the B-roll video the other day, might be yesterday when you're seeing this. Just gonna go over real quick some of the parts choices and what I've done to get this case to look like this. So as you may or may not know, this case comes in silver, and out the box it had a lot of missing paint spots and good amount of scuffs, and I had bought two of them, so it wasn't unique to one. So I think the QC level, because this case originally is about $400, $450. The quality control is a little bad. It's actually horrific at that price, but you know, since I was gonna paint it, I didn't really care. It's gonna need to be sanded and stuff anyway. So starting from the front, this is a flat black with a matte coat. This white, I don't know if the lighting will catch it. It's kind of hard to see in the light, especially on film, is a white base coat. Then you have on top of that white pearl metallic, and then on top of that a matte coat. Now I know the matte coat kind of just kills any pearl effect, but it's still visible in under light. I don't know how well it comes across on the screen. It probably doesn't come across well, but in natural light, you know, sitting there, I can still see it. So I painted the bars on top, so you can probably tell, being the cameraman at the same time. I painted the bars on top. I also painted this piece. As for all the carbon fiber trim you see here, this is hydro dipped. So I took all the plastic out, including the buttons here and etc. I hydro dipped it all. It's my first time hydro dipping. It looks a lot easier when you see people do it online. It's easy for small pieces, but for large pieces, it can be pretty challenging. And the activator smells horrible. So, you know, keep that in mind. I know the fans are probably something that everybody is going to have a question on, so I'm just going to pop this open here. I don't know how well you can see in there, but these are Lanley SL 120s. So what I've done is I have the whites and the blacks. So these are actually from a black version, and the blade is actually from a black version. They actually just pop right out. This is a vinyl decal that I created and cut and just, you know, placed over the original. You could remove the original Lanley logo with the heat gun, but this is pretty, the blades just pop out, by the way. They pop right out. I would say be extremely careful if you're going to try this, because some of the blades don't pop out that easily, and you will break the frame structure if you put too much effort, put too much stress on it. Now, if you want to paint the blades, you should also pop them out, obviously, but you couldn't paint them in the frame. You just have a lot of wrapping to do. But since I already had them, I didn't want to put a layer of paint on a fan blade. You know, I didn't see the need to paint it if I already had it, and I wasn't using them. So now I have a black frame one with a white blade, and I'll paint the white blade for another purpose. So this is pretty much how I got this look. Now, I will say that, you know, this case has a lot of creaks to it. I don't know if you can hear that. Oh, I'm turning it on. But it has a lot of creaks to it, and that comes in line with the plastic construction. This was actually not spray paint. This was, let me turn the light down here. This was using a mini spray gun, a mini Iwata spray gun. I recently got that, and I thought it was, you know, a better experience than spray paint for sure. You have more control. Now, moving into the interior of the case, speaking of paint, these are, if I just zoom in here, these tubes are painted with a mix of Createx, it's a brand of airbrush paints or spray paints, Createx matte, directly mixed with Createx jet black, and sprayed out the gun directly like that. I had tried doing a jet black and then a satin coat, and it just came out way too shiny. Then when I tried the Createx, I put the jet black first, and then I put the matte coat on top. Then it came out too muted. And this somehow kind of got that, you see, it still shines. It's not like a pure matte. It's like a satinish look to it, but it's still matte. And that's the kind of look I was going for. So I actually painted these like 4 or 5 times to get this look. But in terms of when if you paint tubes, just make sure you mask the end that goes past the rubber O-ring inside the fitting. You don't want it mixing, right? So anything past that O-ring, you don't have to go to the collar like some people want to, mark off at the collar. You don't have to. You can actually mark off a little bit more, and I would suggest marking off a little bit more, because when you put the collar on, it's going to scrape on the tube, and you got to be really careful, because for straight bends like this is not an issue, but when you have something at an angle and you have to get so you're going to have to put the collar over it a little bit, just enough to expose the tube to go into the fitting, because you don't want this collar sliding up and down on a painted surface. It's rough, it will scratch. If you have an extremely thick clear coat on there, you might even have problems getting the collar on and off, right? So be extremely careful if you're painting tubings. Just remember for the collar, you can go past the collar by, like, depending on the fitting. I think these, with the EK ones, you could probably go like 5mm, no problem. A little less than 5mm, and you won't have any paint mixing with your coolant. As for the distro plate itself, this is an EK Evolve reflection. I simply mounted it to the frame of this case. There's a hard drive cage, and how I mounted it was I just this is one of the prototypes. I 3D printed some brackets that I measured out and just used the bracket as a custom mounting bracket. Worked out fine. So you have a 3D printer, you can always make parts for your PC, right? Moving on to the board. I made a video about this board before, and I said then that this is one of those enthusiast boards that you don't talk about price, and you don't talk about if it's worth it or not. It's something that if you want it, you want it. Now, would I say it's worth it? No, but it's essentially just an extreme edition with a custom full cover that covers everything, including the chipset, right? Now, there are a couple of things about this board I noticed. They did change some of the headers around. Like, for example, the headers over here, they're labeled like water pump 1, water pump 2. But in reality, if you look in the manual, they're called like case fan 1, case fan 2, and something else. So at the, I think, $1,500 price point, Asus should at least, kind of figure out that instruction manual correctly. I mean, I guess the intended audience will probably know, but then you have people with, more money than sense, right? And they buy stuff and they kind of expect the level of detail in the manual at the very minimum. And I'll come back to that for another accessory that comes with this board. Now, the board itself is structured the same way as the Extreme. So while I personally wanted to use a 10900K in this build originally, because I still think overall it's a better fit than the 11900K, I couldn't, because the two M2 slots down over here, they actually share a lane. They share lanes with PCIe X2 over here. So what happens is, if you use the 10th gen CPU in this board, you're essentially, and then you put an M2 in there, you're essentially crippling the top slot to PCIe 3 X8, because it will split the lanes for any M2 that goes in there. Now, there's 3 M2 slots under this plate over here. One of them goes directly to CPU, and that requires 11th gen, okay? And the other two, they share lanes with the second PCIe's full slot. So in order to actually use those two slots, use that top slot, and not cripple your GPU, you have to go with the 11th gen, okay? So it forces you into the 11th gen, whether you like it or not. Unless you want to use like half the board, that kind of defeats the purpose, right? So with the 11th gen in and 2 M2 slots, the 2 M2 slots there, the M2 slot directly connected to the CPU, you maintain a X8, a Gen 4 on the GPU, which is the same as the X16 Gen 3, right? So one more thing about this board is that it does have a built-in temperature sensor. for water temperature. There's the leaking thing. I don't know how the leaking thing works, and I hope I don't find out. It's supposed to alert you when it leaks. I don't know how it's going to do that. I would assume that, I think these rings are supposed to light up, but you know, I'm not going to trigger a leak to find out. You will have to obviously configure your fans to operate to that water temperature. In the BIOS, it's known as water block in and water block out, right? So I think the two sensors are fairly close inside that mono block. Now I am going to say that I think the sensors are, because of the close proximity to the whole CPU area itself, it's a little warmer, like 3 degrees, 4 degrees warmer than it should be. Because if I take a temperature sensor probe and I dump it into this right here, and I'm just measuring at the reservoir, okay, and it's about 2 degrees, 3 degrees. It's actually like 3 to 4 degrees less. Now in this loop, you know, this is not a huge loop, right? So the water temperature here would only be about 1C, 2C different at best, right? So while I did originally have a temp sensor fitting over here, I noticed that when I had it here, it was still less than the water being measured here by like 4 or 5 degrees, and that's too much of a margin, right? So, you know, I have temperature sensors, so I can tell you for sure that this is a little higher than it should be. So if you have it on your desk and you have another water cooling system and you notice, hey, how come my water temperature is higher idle, and you have similar heat output, similar cooling on both, that's why. Okay, the sensor is a little bit off. Other than that, this is the Strix 3090 with the active backplate. You can actually see the block itself over here, active backplate on the other side. I will be uploading an installation video on how I got this backplate on there. They're a pain in the ass to put on, for sure. Performance, like I said, I'll put a link to that video. I'll talk about it in that video. Now, this thing is something that you probably noticed. This is actually a cheat, because there is a non-EK fitting underneath here. And that's why I had 3D printed a collar, and then I put a little graphic over it so that, you know, you don't see it. But yeah, there's some fittings that EK needs to make that's not available in their Quantum line or Classic line, and you know, I've put in the suggestion, and hopefully they'll make it. As I think that pretty much wraps it up. Just one more thing that I did in this case. I don't think most people are going to notice, but this is actually a wood veneer that I stained ebony. You can probably see I stained it so dark that I got rid of most of the grain. I did do this multiple times, and I ended up picking this grain because it kind of, see it, I don't know if I can get in here, but you can see it. It looks like I can punch in. Is it gonna let me punch in? No, it's not gonna let me punch in. Okay, so it looks like wood still. You know, you can still kind of see the grain. I kind of just took a very thin veneer sheet and I stained it, and I just glued it on top of the original cover. And another thing I've done in this here is, you know what? Let me swing it around. If I can swing this whole thing around here. So, okay, let me back the camera up. Okay. So you can see here for the back, I have just vinyl, vinyl cut. This is actually embossed, you can't tell. This panel just hides all the wiring because I have double glass. If you wonder how I got a second glass door, I had 2 cases, so I have another glass door. That pretty much sums it up. But you can actually see the pearl, that's what I was talking about. But yeah. On the other side of this panel is actually perforated leather, which after I did everything, I noticed you can't actually see it from the front because everything is so tight packed. But yeah, in the slimmest of gaps, you know, you'll just see leather, which is not something you'll notice looking at it unless you really look at it. And yeah, I mean, I kind of wish it stood out more. So in this build, I try to get, I try to get wood, I try to get leather, I try to get painted like surfaces, and I try to, you know, get the silver going, kind of just have that premium auto look. And if you're wondering how my pump cover icon, the EK logo on my pump cover is correctly orientated, is because I punched it out and I stuck it back. You know, it's just glued on, so you can just punch it out, put it back in the way you want it. Another question I've gotten is, how do I get my I/O cables out? Now, if you notice, don't do that. But I have a gap here. That was intentional. That's why this rad is a slim rad. I had a thicker rad before and I couldn't make any clearances. So I have 90-degree adapters even for the GPU, and that just allows me to run everything out. And everything comes out through the top rubber grommet over here. And that's pretty much, let's see if we can get that in the view. Yeah, so everything, all the wires run out this grommet here, and that's how I'm able to connect this up.